All right. We'll mute our computers. Fantastic. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jenna Stoner. As acting mayor this month, I'll be chairing Committee of the Whole for the District of Squamish, Tuesday, November 29th. Hatsqualin, Queeslukmuk, Tlaxcohomish, Okmeo. We are fortunate to be meeting today on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. Could I get a motion to adopt the agenda, please? Moved by Mayor Herford, seconded by Councillor French. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. This afternoon, we have a short but important agenda with our quarterly financial report, and Mr. Roland Russell is here to give us an update on where our financials are at the end of Q3. I'll pass it over to you, and then I think we'll probably try and aim to leave questions for the end. So we'll let you go through your presentation, and then we'll go around the room and ask questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Stoner. I'm going to pause for a moment and let our wonderful CFO Heather Boxrood add a few comments.
Thank you very much, Council, and thanks for joining us today. I just wanted to make a quick note that Appendix 3 was not online in terms of publishing. So apologies on behalf of staff. We have a printout for everyone, and it will be posted online at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boxrood. And with that, I will commence the presentation. We're meeting today to discuss the Q3 results. Those results will be to the end of September. Just a couple of things which note are speaking to what is included in your report and how it's set up. So the operating financial report focuses on the core service areas. It compares the quarter end actuals to the quarter end budget. It shows the prior year's budgets, and it displays the spending as a pace of the total percent of budget. In Appendix 1, there is an outline which shows which cost centers are combined into which segments. And the note at the bottom is important in that expenses tend to run slightly behind actuals, behind the actual work complete, and that is just simply due to the timing requirements of the financial system that we are using. Okay, so with respect to our operating results to the end of Q3, the end of September, within the general fund, would like to comment that operating revenues and expenses are trending within acceptable ranges, and the timing differences that you are seeing, we anticipate will even out by year end. So there's nothing really radical in there with the exception of the last line. Building inspection revenue is approximately $1 million ahead of budget. That is unexpected. But welcome, let's say. And then utility funds are pretty much online. They're where we would expect with revenues and expenses. They're all within reasonable ranges, and would anticipate that any variances will probably be tidied up by year end. With respect to special operating projects, and capital, there's a number of items that are included in your package. So appendixes 2 and 3, which you have 2, outline the various projects that we have. So one attachment for operating projects, one attachment for capital projects. And in addition to that, we have Appendix 4, which lists the procurement tenders that have been awarded during the prior quarter. It gives you a little bit of an outline for the categorization that is applied. And the other comment that I should note is that attached to this, there is also a listing of the managers by initials. So if you see initials down here, we hope that you also have that page that allows you to identify the individual manager. If you don't, please let us know, and we will make sure that the manager is available online or in person, as the case may be. So on to some highlights of the projects. But before we go to the highlights of the projects, we'd like to make some comments with respect to our COVID restart grant. And these are the highlights. So we had anticipated a shortfall in recreation of approximately $230,000. That was the budgeted amount. It's now looking like it's about $100,000 higher than that. As a result of that, the unallocated funds that are available, which originally were identified as $182,000, are now projected to be around $120,000. Our recommendation is to allocate $30,000 of that to a grant writing initiative, which is managed by Economic Development and administered by Chamber of Commerce. That grant writing initiative was underway in 21 and again in 22, and with quite successful results. Both the business community and the Chamber of Commerce remarked on how much they felt that was a real positive development. So they've asked if that could be available again for 2023. And the other items, we're estimating that of the 90,000 of the 120,000 that we are estimating could be dedicated towards mental health programming, as was originally planned or anticipated if there was suitable funds available at year end. It should be noted that both the recreation shortfall amount is estimated. And so if that estimate goes higher, then that would offset the amount of dollars that would be available for mental health. So, you know, our goal is to use up the fund this year if possible. Acknowledging that obviously, seeing as it's almost December, we wouldn't necessarily be able to spend all the mental health dollars this year, but we would hope that would be the only outstanding item going into 2023. So that within your meeting minutes, within your agenda package, there is a resolution related to this, which we will be asking a question on later. So highlights of our operating projects. There's this nice little graphic here. As you can see, we've made some fairly significant progress quarter to quarter. We've got 18 projects complete at this point in the operating plan. 41 are in progress. 3 have been delayed or canceled. And with respect to our capital projects, again, we made some pretty good progress. 17 are complete. 55 are in progress. Some are not started. And a number more are canceled and delayed. At this point in time, I will go to the next slide, and the next slide will say questions and discussion, and I will turn it back to the chair, and we will pause. We are here, both finance, with respect to anything related to the funding of projects, etc. And we have a number of managers online who would be, or I guess that's an appropriate term, who would be available to answer questions remotely. So with this, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Russell. Council, going to turn it over to you for questions at this time. Councillor Anderson, go ahead.
Mr. Russell, as I recall, about a year ago, perhaps a little bit more, when we discussed the COVID-19 grant monies and how and when we would allocate them, we deliberately took, at the advice of Ms. Glenday, our CAO, a cautious approach. And because even at that time, a year and a half ago, we were really secure in what the trends of COVID and its implications were. My question to you is, and to the team, is what are other municipalities doing as regards being prepared for the risk of what this unfolding pandemic means for municipalities, any risks that other people are pointing to, and approaches in allocating these funds? You've discussed the allocation in your slides. And we didn't revisit the conversation of a year and a half ago. Was that because the world has changed and we're in a more secure place? I wonder if you could comment on this.
The world has changed. We hope we're in a somewhat more secure place. Although we will admit that if you are listening to the news, you would recognize that there are definitely pressures from this flu and other flus in the medical sphere and pressures on our healthcare system. So at this stage, we are not anticipating a relapse, let's say, of highly restrictive mandates, especially with respect to the recreation programs. But I guess COVID has probably taught us, if nothing else, never say never. So at this point, we're anticipating that our facilities will be able to remain open. We certainly hope that will be the case, both with respect to our citizens and with respect to our facilities. As far as being able to adapt and move forward with programs that we do see needs for, we believe that the use of the funds, the remaining funds, to be dedicated towards mental health is definitely addressing a need that has been raised both in this community and in other communities. And beyond that, I really can't make specific comments about what other communities are doing on a personal level.
Thank you. I see Ms. Boxrud would like to jump in as well.
Yes, thank you through the chair. Just further to Mr. Russell's comment is that we have been advised that the grant should be used up. And that has been sort of the discussion from amongst the community in terms of the GFOA BC community, that most communities are using up the grant. And should something happen where another pandemic, we would certainly look to the government for more funding.
Thank you for that context. I have Councillor Greenlaw, then Councillor Pettingill.
I was just wondering if you had anything more specific than a mental health, towards mental health. Is there any kind of intention to that, or it's just to be allocated at this point?
I see Mr. LePage is in the room. He might be best suited to respond. Just use Ms. Latimer's microphone, please. Thank you.
Actually, just hello. Okay. Through the chair. Yeah, we have been the recreation and culture team have been working on a program that we're able to scale depending on the funds available. That will basically be focused on supporting youth to connect and get together. There's different options and programs that are considered. But because at the time the team looked into different options, we weren't clear on the funds that would be available, right? So there's different scenarios that are built around the budget that will be available, and they will be using the fund to build the program. But the goal is that the programs will be self-funded moving forward, and that we would be able to maintain those programs even after using the COVID grant to start the program, I would say, right? As far as what the programs would look like, there need to be some fine tuning because there's lots of potential options that we would be considering. It's more a question of getting the resource to support the program, which is what we're waiting on regarding the dollar figure that would be available to support the program, right? It's really the financial support will help to resource or staff the structure to support those programs, I would say. That makes sense? And once we have clarity, we can definitely provide update on what we're proposing out of the brainstorming session that we had and different options we're considering. Yeah, so this is what I can propose, is to update you on what we propose to move forward with the funds that will be allocated to support the youth mental health program.
Thank you. And just a quick follow up on that in terms of the timeline. So my understanding is that we're basically using the remainder of what's in the COVID grant for this work. When do we expect to know what that dollar figure will be so that rec staff can start to implement?
I've been working with rec staff to this point to estimate what their revenue shortfall would be. I think probably reasonable. I mean, we're a month away from year end. I think it would be reasonable. Within the next couple of weeks, we probably would know whether they are still on target to meet those numbers. So I would think before we break for Christmas, Recreation would have a pretty good idea as to how much money would be available for them to spend.
That's great. Thanks. I have Councillor Pettingill on my list.
Thank you. So just digging into this a bit more, and maybe this is a question more for council than, is it Mr. LePage or Lepage? Okay. Lepage? Okay. So I appreciate the focus on youth. We have heard that's important. We know there's a definite need there. But seniors also saw massive impacts during the pandemic for, increased vulnerability and inability to have visitation. And then with inflation and, a lot of seniors being on fixed incomes and a very high number below the poverty level, I wonder if I think we've said as a council, both things are really important, but have we set or made it clear enough a relative priority? And so I'm wondering if there should be a bit of a split between youth or seniors. And again, maybe that's more of a council discussion, but I'm just wondering if staff have any thoughts about why they went the direction they did.
Yeah, through the chair. Well, the decision was to focus on youth, as we felt everyone was impacted in some way or form with the restriction of connecting with each other during the pandemic. We're working with the senior community on building new programs. We have an advisory committee focusing on providing more accessibility or programming for the senior community. And we felt that youth needed support as well. So that was something that we discussed at the CLT level on, where we should put focus on. And this is why we looked at youth support or mental health support through the use of the COVID grant. So we thought there was a need there, and it was something that wasn't addressed in another process that we had planned. So this is why we built the proposal around focusing on youth mental health. Right?
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is, the unexpected building permit revenue, is it wholly unexpected revenue, or it's just we're getting it a year or two sooner than we thought we were going to get it?
Through the chair, I think a bit of both, to be fair. Development has been pretty brisk. We had increased the budget year over year from 21 to 22. We're intending to increase the budget again in 23 to reflect the ongoing escalation of building inspection revenue volume. And I think that we probably had a few big ticket developments come on stream this year. It's a pretty tricky game to try to nail down exactly when when a development's going to come to fruition and move to the next phase, and we're going to see the money. We can estimate sort of generically year to year, but you know, if it showed up in December versus January, that could be the difference there. I don't believe that is the case, and I think that Mr. Valeneskis is on the line, and perhaps he could add some additional information there.
Yes, good afternoon. So I would just echo what Roland said. I think the only other piece to this is the construction costs have been rising, and that's pushed up some of the building permit values as well. And we've seen a few really large projects come through. It's always hard to estimate what the construction values are going to be on something like the, you know, the Red Bridge development. That's probably been our biggest permit this year.
Thank you for that further context. Anything further for now, Councillor Pettingill? You're good. All right, I have Mayor Herford and then Councillor French.
Thank you. I'll start with the sort of on the same topic with that building permit revenue. I wondered if there were any other sort of knock-on effects, whether it was DCC spending to catch up with something that's required to support those projects or anything else. It just seems like an interesting thing to sit. I don't think it sits by itself necessarily.
Well, I'll start, and others may need to step in and add additional information. In the 2022 budget, we added a number of positions in planning and engineering and specifically building inspection. So I think part of the reason that we were able to generate more revenue in building inspections is that we were better prepared and better positioned to be able to manage the increase in volumes. So I think in this instance, it might be a case of we saw this coming and staffed up to be able to manage it, and perhaps it's larger than we had anticipated. I will also note that with respect to that, both our CAC volumes and our DCC volumes are running ahead of where they were in prior years. We don't budget those per se because they're a direct flow through into reserves. But both of those areas are running ahead of where they had been. So they're all kind of moving in parallel. I hope that addresses your question.
Yes, thank you. That makes sense to me. And as I was looking through this, the material, I noticed a few of these few projects were listed as done and complete, with a low percentage of the budget spent, or in some cases zero. And is there a way to discern between which projects actually came in under budget and which projects are just waiting for that invoicing lag that we see with projects from time to time? I couldn't untangle that myself.
Through the chair, we've asked managers to identify where projects are complete and there are delays in invoicing or timing of expenses. And generally they do. So I think in most cases where there's a fairly significant difference between the dollar value you're seeing and what they expect the total cost will be, they will put in a comment such as awaiting invoicing or something like that. It's possible that some of those comments have been missed. Acknowledge that. And thankfully we're not too far away from year end. So the projects will be wrapped up for this year, and we'll get to see what the true dollar value is. As we acknowledge, there is a timing lag between what you see in the report and when all the invoicing is gone into the system. So We acknowledge that, and we've been, reminding managers to identify if there are lags. So we're hoping that they have completed that. Obviously, if there are specific projects that you had questions about with respect to that, we would suggest that you ask the individual managers. Thank you.
I'll take the opportunity to do just that. I think it's line 39. It's the annual road painting marking, for instance. So we had $75,000 allotted. It says complete. We've had a 0% budget spend, and I just wanted to check on where that one sits, particular.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Jesse Moore, Capital Projects Manager. So we have invoiced that project. All invoicing is in. I believe with that one that the coding is incorrect, and so I believe it's been coded to another project. But we have received the invoice, and I believe have paid it at this point. We just need to do it's called a journal voucher and transfer it into that account.
Thank you. And then the next one is the line 87, which is the covered structures. And it says there's one structure remaining to be installed due to a location change mid-project. And I'm just curious if we spend 100% of the allotted budget, or we will on that project, or if for some reason that came in, at 50% of expected cost and we have some cash left there.
I see Cal just popped up. Hi, Mr. Bragg. I'll pass that over to you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me?
You're pretty faint.
Yep.
Maybe if you could speak louder or
I'll
closer
speak
to
a
the
little bit
microphone.
louder.
Yeah, there we
In
go.
short answer, yes, we will be spending that full $100,000. There's no savings and there's no overruns at this stage.
Thank you. And I think I'll leave my questions there for now. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor French.
Thanks, Chair. Just carrying on with the line of question around the surprise $1 million from the building department. I'm thinking that this could be a product of project managers seeing interest rates going up, inflation following, and getting their projects rolling. And so then that has me worrying about potential impacts into 2023 and beyond. So is there planning underway that could potentially take into account decreases in expected revenues from that front?
Go ahead, Mr. Rowland.
Through the chair, yes. In fact, there are. In the 2023 through 2027 5-year plan, we have increased the building inspection revenue in the years of 23, 24, and then we put it up, I believe, $500,000, because we think that a chunk of this year is an anomaly related to one specific project rather than a trend that's sustainable. So we've increased it to reflect the value that we think is sustainable, and we've kept it at that level for 23, 24, and I'm trying to rack my memory about whether or not it's 25, but then we've slowed it down. We brought it back down in future years. We were acknowledging the fact that it's not necessarily likely that we will be able to maintain this level of momentum without a recession at some point in the future. And so we should probably back off our reliance on developer funding in the future.
And if you could further clarify perhaps that building inspection fees are self-funded. So it is revenue that we're getting in from developers, but it's paying for work that is development related.
It is paying for work that is, through the chair, that is correct. It is paying for work that is development related, but building inspection revenue flows into the general fund. It flows into our general operating account. So if any excess revenues can be used to fund other areas within within the organization, whereas development cost charges flow directly into a reserve and can only be used for very specific purposes. So I think that's probably the difference that should be noted with respect to them. Does that answer your question?
It does. I have one more follow-up on that, and I'll send it back to you, Councillor French. That additional funding would go in with our new policy, though, would go into our general operating reserve, correct? And then allocated for the following year's budget.
It would go into the general operating reserve. That is correct.
Thank you. Councillor French, carry on. Sorry for interrupting.
Oh no, that added value. Thank you. I don't actually have any further questions, but I do, Chair, wish to point out that Councillor Anderson had indicated he had some questions that he hasn't asked yet that I'm very much looking forward to hearing the answers to.
I'm sure we'll get back to him. I haven't seen his hand yet, though, so I'm put myself on the list. And Andrew, if you have any questions, then we'll come to you. So I do have a few questions myself. The first is on the appendix with the awarded tenders. And I don't see Mr. Rayner on, so maybe this will be to you, Ms. Boxford, or maybe he is on there and I just missed him. But there are a number of projects that we haven't included social and environmental as part of the bid process. And I'm just curious what criteria we use for when we include that as one of the pillars and when we don't. So an example that I was kind of surprised by is like the Sea to Sky electric vehicle line item doesn't have the social and environmental side and the website services.
Through the chair, Mr. Rayner is on the line. I don't think he's necessarily brought onto the panel at this point, so we'll look for him to be promoted to answer the specifics of that question. It might take a couple minutes, though.
Yeah, no problem. Maybe I'll go to another question and we'll come back, Mr. Rayner, once we have you up as a panelist. And I think my other question will probably go to Ms. Mulligan, and it's about the grant writing for the or extended use of the COVID-19 funding for ongoing grant writing. And my understanding was the first few years that we used this, the Chamber was using it to leverage other pots of money that were being provided by federal and provincial governments to kind of buoy the business sector through COVID. And I'm just curious, are those pots of money still exist, or are we supporting businesses to go after different pots of money at this point?
Thank you for the question. So I'm Kate Mulligan, Economic Development Officer for the district. To answer your question, the Chamber is actually going after available funds that fall within provincial and federal funding. However, they might not be specific COVID-related grants. So they are enabling businesses within the district through a variety of different grants that are made available. And so the grant writers work with the applicant to ensure that the grant aligns to the priorities of the program, which are focused on adding resiliency and recovery for businesses.
Okay, that's great and helpful. Thank you. Do we have Mr. Rayner up yet? He's coming. Okay, great. I'll ask one other question. Oh, yeah, Mr. Morwood, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Through yourself, through the chair, I was on the periphery of the EV tender, and so maybe I can hopefully shed some light. And our previous manager of procurement, who's no longer with the district, was also largely involved. So, like I said, maybe I'm best to answer the question. What I recall is that we are a partner in that tender. I think there was 4 organizations in the Sea to Sky corridor, and Squamish was just one. It was all to do with the grant funding that we got for these EV chargers. I believe that R1W really created most of the tender. We posted it and reviewed it, but a lot of the structure was created by them. It was also, like I said, in tandem with 3 organizations. So we might have deviated a little bit from our kind of standard practice, in order to facilitate, keep everybody happy and to get it posted. Thank you.
That's some helpful context for that particular project. There's a few on that list that we don't have the environmental and social component for. So just curious for that broader policy piece, but I can also follow up afterwards. That's a good reminder that we need to get Whistler on board with BCSPI. Thank you, Mr. Morwood. My last question was in the capital projects, the parks ops and the park satellite projects are deferred. And I'm just curious if someone can provide an update there on those two projects. Cal, I think that goes to you, Mr. Bragg. Or Mr. Buxton looks like he's getting ready to answer.
Through the chair, yes. I can answer. In the parks, now I'm trying to remember, there's the parks operations, downtown operations building. That's essentially postponed until further notice because the lease was extended on the opioid support side at the fire hall across the parking lot here. We were intending to repurpose that building, but with the extension of that lease, we now have to find another location for that. And the park satellite, maybe Mr. Bragg, trying to remember why that.
Hi, Cal. Go
Hi.
ahead.
Yeah, the park satellite, Mr. Buxton, you are correct. We're looking at that for Brennan Park as well. So Brennan Park, we're working on informing the overall plans, and this ties into the satellite areas for the parks as well. So we're still working on this, and we haven't resolved the final decision.
Thank you. All right, I will pass it over to Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Councillor Stoner. So I've got a question that's probably more about educating myself, just trying to get up to speed on what projects are happening. So when I looked through the special project list, I was selected the highest cost items that were not grant funded. And there were two projects I saw that were sort of over 200,000 or so. Was project number 5, reference number 5, the Community Energy Emissions Plan, and item number 22, Eagle Viewing Reserve Pre-Design. And I just wondered if I could get a brief synopsis of what these projects are, because they seem to be a fair fraction of our total special project budget. Thanks.
Through the chair, I believe we have Mr. Pickett's on the line, and I believe that Mr. Ralston will also be on the line to answer that question.
On the line, right behind your shoulder. Mr. Pickett's, we'll go to you first for the Community Climate Action Plan, and then we'll have Mr. Ralston come up.
Thank you. Through the chair, Ian Pickett's, Manager of Sustainability and Climate Change. So the Community Energy and Emissions Plan funding, that supports the Senior Energy Specialist position. So this is a position that's 80% funded through a Fortis Climate Action Partnership Agreement. So of the $210,000, $100,000 of it is allocated to this position. The position is currently only 0.8 full-time equivalent, so it's slightly less than that. So about $64,000 is funded through Fortis, and then about 16 from us. And then we have a $20,000 budget associated with that position. We have also added slightly over $100,000 to this budget item in anticipation of finding external funding. So basically, if we can get external funding, we have a budget placed so that we can spend it. So just for your reference, this year, we got just over $50,000 from BC Hydro for an embodied carbon project. We got $10,000 from Emotive for the multi-unit residential building project. And then we got $40,000 from Fortis for 2 studies on the Adventure Center. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, and then we have Mr. Ralston here to speak to the CHM Dike.
Through the chair. So the Eagle Viewing pre-design project is in fact 100% grant funded. And the scope of that project was to complete a seismic assessment You can see that we have underspent on that relative to the total budget. So we spent about 70,000 of 200. The $200,000 budget was sort of hedged on receiving an additional grant to complete an environmental assessment, which we were not successful with. But on the bright side of that, the Squamish Nation, we've been working in partnership with them. They were able to secure funding to complete that work. So we are in fact getting it done, but it's just not showing up on the district's books.
Great, thanks very much.
Any further questions, Mr. Anderson? All right, Councillor Anderson, back to you.
Thank you. First topic I'd like to address is the neighborhood planning, neighborhood area planning, and there is a reference to archaeological assessment, $12,000 awarded. I take it that this is an archaeological overview assessment rather than an archaeological impact assessment, a more detailed assessment, the latter. We did not undertake for previous neighborhood planning exercises an archaeological overview assessment, either for Wilson Crescent neighborhood or for Loggers Lane East, to my knowledge. We have one underway or have requested one or in the process of one for the landfill expansion and for North Crumpet, as is expected of the developer. My question is, what criteria or policy are we applying today in deciding whether to commission or request an archaeological overview assessment?
Mr. Valeniskas, go ahead.
Thank you. That's a great question and observation. So it is something that we're practicing a lot more than even a few years ago. But in a lot of cases, and I believe in this case as well, this is the feedback we're hearing from the Squamish Nation through our engagement and referral process. So we're following up on the Squamish Nation's request. And yes, it's not a detailed assessment; it's an overview of the area.
Thank you, Mr. Valeniskas. I'll just add an observation that something that might be considered for future neighborhood plans or sub-area plans is a heritage context statement that might provide some context and orientation for the question of whether or to what importance or urgency an archaeological assessment might be needed. For example, in the Garibaldi Estates area, which does not touch on the Cowtain village, there was a trail that's marked on our very earliest maps, and that is something that we might address in a heritage context statement, and then we can decide, or it can be discussed as to whether to move forward. It's just a suggestion as to whether we might also, alongside archaeological overview assessments, be looking at heritage context statements as a useful tool, and the two would work together. That's just an observation, and I make it, Mr. Valeniskas, as we do have the heritage strategy study underway at this time, and we'll be coming back to council in the future. Chair, I'd like to ask another question regarding reference number 6, Estuary Environmental Coordination Plan. It's an engineering study. $20,000 are allocated to it. And with the theme of governance has come up quite often in conversations around waterfront and estuary management projects over the last long while, and not least from members of the Squamish Estuary Management Committee, members being different stakeholder groups. And I note with interest that we have in the description that a purchase order has been issued for terms of reference development, and that first meetings are anticipated sometime in the future after dredging study, more work done on that. My question is, what is the relationship of this initiative, the terms of reference development, to the Marine Action Strategy, where in Focus Area 1, which is governance and shared leadership, there's extensive reference to taking such steps, but there's no explicit reference to Marine Action Strategy here. I wonder if the relationship or context could be elaborated on, if you're able to do this.
Go ahead, Mr. Buxton.
The chair. This action is the principal means of implementing that objective 121.
Thank you. Given that Marine Action Strategy Objective 1.21 and in fact several other documents refer explicitly to working with the Estuary Management Committee, my second question is, has the Estuary Management Committee members, have they been informed of this Terms of Reference Development Initiative?
No.
That
committee hasn't met in 6 years, so a number of the committee members aren't available anymore. Yes, we are aware of some of the local ones, but in terms of the provincial and federal governments, those have no interest, and they've been clear in expressing that. So are we aware of the local ones? Yes, and when we get to that point of having the terms of reference, we can certainly discuss it with them.
Well, I actually would suggest that this should be taken in conjunction with the development of the terms of reference, and I don't think that it should be done in the order that you suggest. And the reason is that the people that are asking have been asking for over the last 2-3 years as to when the district will convene a meeting of the Estuary Management Committee. There's 3 different sectors represented on that committee that are always asking this question. Most recently in July, Nature Squamish, which has represented conservation. The district has taken on the role of chair, and thereby it takes on a responsibility. And if people are asking, members are asking to convene a meeting, and we have a gap in attending to reappointments in at least 2 sectors, then we might be mindful that we have some responsibility here. And I think that it's also something we might consider is that the Estuary Management Plan and the Estuary Management Committee have not been discussed by Council since May 2018. That's 2 councils ago. Perhaps we're overdue for an orientation for this council, for staff, many of whom are new and new to this plan. I think a lot of stakeholders are looking at us carefully. I think we don't want to be falling into a loss of corporate memory as to our relationship and our policy. What is the district policy towards SEMC? What is the district policy towards SEMP? That is, of course, an observation, Mr. Buxton, but I do think we should be concerned about it, and I think that there's a great deal of value in considering our experience and people's interests ongoing in the Estuary Management Plan and the Estuary Management Committee. Thank you.
I don't think I heard a question in there, and so I'll leave it as comment. Although my understanding of the proposed project is to try and initiate some of those conversations and have a broader understanding of where SEMC is at and where it needs to go going forward, given the challenges that it's had over the past years. And so I don't think now is the time to hash out, or in this table is not the place to do it. But the proposal from staff has been in this budget line item to do the work that's under line item 6, Estuary Environmental Coordination Plan, to be able to have those conversations and move that work forward. Councillor Anderson.
Well, the Marine Action Strategy explicitly says that this should be and shall be undertaken in coordination with SEMC. And Chair, with all due respect, that is not what is being suggested at this time. Again, an observation. Thank you.
All right. You're always welcome to make a motion if you want to change direction, but that requires a motion to council. And if you want further information on that, that might be the flavor of your motion. Go ahead.
Sorry. I would like to move that prior to terms of reference development for an estuary environmental coordination plan, and that should be in quotes, by the way, estuary environmental coordination plan, that council address the status of district policy regarding the Estuary Management Committee.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Councillor French. Councillor Anderson.
I just would like for the minute taker to play that back for us to make sure that I'm seconding what I think I'm seconding.
Shar, were you able to catch that, or do you want Councillor Anderson to repeat it?
Thank you. That prior to terms of reference development for an estuary environment coordination plan, in quotes, that council address the status of district policy regarding the estuary management committee.
That's what you're seconding, Councillor French. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Anderson?
Chair, I think I'll just reiterate that we have taken on a responsibility in not only as the plan coordinator since day one, since the estuary plan was signed in 1999, we took on responsibility as secretariat. That secretariat role involves administering board or committee reappointments. We've also taken on the role of chair, and we might and indeed have been accused of being in conflict of interest when we take on the role of chair and then we don't convene meetings. This has been raised from a number of quarters or tables, members in the Estuary Management Committee over recent years, and most recently during a council meeting that I referred to in May 2022, or sorry, May 2018. So I think it is due diligence that we address our policy, our relationship with the Estuary Management Committee, what is our vision for it, our relationship with it, prior to developing these terms of reference. Thank you.
Councillor French, do you want to speak to it as a seconder?
This is a discussion and a topic that I've been concerned about for a number of years, and our quote unquote lack of attention. So in my mind, any discussion that we have on this is helpful and productive. So I'll be supporting Councillor Anderson's motion simply because I want us to have this conversation, and I think this could potentially be a good starting point for it.
And Mayor Herford, then Councillor Pettingill, then myself.
Thank you. I appreciate the discussion around this topic. I am mindful that anything on this list has already been through our budgeting process. And by issuing a PO, we're well down the road on this particular action. So the motion, the intent of the motion to have something come back to committee of the whole to discuss estuary management more broadly, I think is entirely appropriate. I think attaching this piece to it undoes a discussion around that would have been handled throughout the whole budgeting process. So yes to the second half, but I'm not ready to support the first part of the motion. So I'm curious to hear the rest of the discussion around the table, and I may be proposing an amendment to the motion to reflect that. So in general, yes, I agree that a future discussion around that estuary governance is important, but I don't think we're quite there with this motion.
Councillor Pettingill, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess my understanding is that it wasn't just an issue of the district refusing, or it wasn't an issue of the district refusing to assign new members. It was that key bodies just didn't want to participate. So there was no one for us to assign. So there are, I take it, a number of issues to work out. It is my understanding that this budget item is the first step in working that out. So I guess unless I'm fundamentally misunderstanding something, and I acknowledge there's a whole bunch of issues that are unresolved or things have changed and we need to update that context, but I understood this to be the venue where we pursue that. And so I would hesitate to stall that, especially when there's a purchase order out and so on.
Thank you. I will not be supporting the motion on the floor. I agree with Councillor Pettingill. This was actually put in our budget, I believe, last year and was a carryover. There's a staff capacity issue in terms of actually moving this work forward, and it's great to see that a purchase order is out. As we know, other key members, the province and the feds in particular, just haven't been at the table, and so it's hard to force them to send somebody. And I think our staff are trying to figure out a way forward, given the challenges that we've had over the years. And I think that this is the first step to do it, is the work that's in here. I think a broader conversation, if we want, at the council table, does make sense. I think it should come back to committee of the whole, but I think staff need to do a little bit more work and move this particular line item forward before it comes back to council, because I don't think we have all the information yet on the current landscape to have an informed discussion at the council table. So I won't support this motion. I would support something that would move this to agenda planning committee of the whole next year when we have more information. Anybody else have comments at this point? Otherwise, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Councillor Pettingill, Mayor Herford, Councillor Stoner oppose. Motion carries.
The status of the motion, Chair.
It carries. All right. With that, Councillor Pettingill, go ahead.
So we now have a budgeted item with funding and so on. We've asked for a bunch more work to be done first, but we don't have money or capacity or anything assigned. So what happens with this purchase order and all this stuff here? That's
yeah, that's a good question. I think that staff will have to take that motion away and an understanding of where the purchase order is at and come back to council with the potential implications of it, would be my suggestion, but I will look to Mr. Buxton or acting CAO.
Sorry, through the chair, Gary Buxton again. We haven't executed a contract on that purchase order. So if it's, my understanding is the purpose of the motion is this comes back to council for discussion.
Councillor Anderson, is that correct? You want this to come back to council for discussion before the purchase order is complete?
Yes, Chair, that is the intent of my motion. There's been reference to lacking pieces of information around the table here and beyond, and I think that a discussion would be useful. We should also bear in mind that the development of terms of reference for new terms of reference for governance was the task of a day-long workshop of a full room of volunteers. And that's in limbo, the outcome of those work. And I'm sure that the planning staff who did participate will pass on the results from that workshop. But my point here is we've had a lot of volunteers involved in doing work, and they're asking, what was the value of the work I did in developing terms of reference for this very task, for this very purpose? That was back in late December 2018. So that's a long time ago, but those are a lot of volunteers gathered in a room, and what was the outcome of their work? We haven't convened any meetings since. So we should also think about who we bring forward in future for these tasks and respect their effort. And right now, their efforts are in limbo. Thank you.
Mr. Buxton, did that help clarify?
Through the chair, my understanding is it's simply been referred to a future council agenda for discussion.
All right. Thank you. Council, any further questions on the quarterly financial report? Yes, Ms. Boxford.
Through the chair, I've been told that Mr. Rayner is on the line and is available to answer your previous questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. We elapsed enough time for Mr. Rayner. Mr. Rayner, I'll repeat my question just in case that will be helpful. And I was just curious about if we have kind of general guidelines as to when we include the environmental and social categories for the tender awards. There are a number in the list that actually don't include those, but some do. And so I'm just curious when we choose to and when we choose not to.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the question. Through the chair. Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair. So some of the competitions that we have run are secondary competitions to a pre-qualification that we have run originally where the suppliers are qualified on a number of criteria that includes the social procurement evaluations. So there was one of those, the corridor trail lighting project was a second round competition where the supplier had already all of the people who were invited to compete were pre-qualified already under the social procurement evaluation criteria in the original RFSQ competition that we undertook. And I can also see on 2256, we did actually include some social criteria, evaluation criteria in there, but it's not listed on that sheet there, but that is an error. Mr. Morwood did discuss P100, the EV network expansion, and so he did mention that the collaboration with Whistler on that one. I can see though that the supplier who won that contract is actually one of our pre-qualified suppliers already under another competition. So it didn't apply in that case, but they are actually a supplier who does have some social value programs that we've already seen from them. And then for 2247 and 2261, I'm not 100% sure exactly why there was no criteria involved in those ones. I can take a look and see what may have happened when we drafted those. But to answer your question, generally speaking, any of the competitions that we post publicly or to our pre-qualified suppliers should have social procurement criteria associated with them. And generally speaking, there isn't usually a reason why we wouldn't have it in there. So
That's very helpful. Thank you for that context and the detail. All right, looking around the table, any further questions? Mayor Herford?
I was going to move the staff recommendations together, if that's okay.
Would you mind moving them separately? I might make an amendment to the second one.
That's totally fine. Then I'll move the first recommended motion. The District of Squamish received the Q3 2022 quarterly financial report for information.
Seconded by Councillor Hamilton. Any comments on the motion? No. I'll thank staff for a very thorough report and led to lots of good discussion this afternoon. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. And the second motion, I might put the motion on the floor with a small amendment. So as it says, that the District of Squamish direct residual BC COVID-19 restart grant funding as follows: 30,000 economic development to enable grant writing initiative for 2023, and any remaining funds be allocated to recreation to support mental health programming, and that staff bring back an update in the form of a memo to council on the chosen mental health programming approach. Seconded by Councillor French. I'll speak to it briefly, and just the addition, hearing from my council colleagues around the table, Councillor Pettingill in particular, just trying to understand, I think providing some flexibility to recreation in terms of how that will go forward, but wanting some level of reporting back to council. And I think in a memo form would be great. Then we have it, and if we need to pull it and have further discussion, then we can, but then it doesn't actually hinder staff's ability to move forward on those really important projects. So that's why I added that in there. Anybody else want to speak to it? Councillor French, go ahead.
Thanks. And I'm supporting the motion because I think that this is a very simple request, and there's never any harm in knowing more than knowing less. Thanks.
Mayor Herford.
Thank you. Both pieces of this, both the economic development piece and the mental health support, I think are creative ways to use this funding to better our community. And I was really happy to see both pieces come forward, and I'm welcome the update when it's available.
Councillor Pettingill, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the motion. I think we all know that as with where we are economically and just COVID and everything, there's much more need than resources. And so I think going into strategic planning and so on, just having that understanding of the choices we're making will help inform us to make, set good priorities going forward. And so I think this will be useful information to have. Thank you.
Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. I'll also be supporting the motion, and I'd like to encourage staff, perhaps when they do come back with a more detailed report, to consider when the motion is talking about mental health programming, and consider perhaps seniors as well in the mental health programming that does get proposed as in addition to youth. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? I think both of these options are really good uses of the remainder of the BC COVID-19 grant. I think generally speaking, we know economically and mental health are two of the longest lasting impacts of the pandemic that we maybe weren't fully accounting for in the days when we knew that we had to lock down and distance ourselves. So hopefully these funds can be used and leveraged with our community partners. The work that the Chamber did in terms of the grant writing initiative was so valuable. So putting some more money there is great. We know it'll be amplified significantly, as well as the proposal that was in our package by Recreation to partner with Sea to Sky Community Services on the youth services program. I also know is a way that we use our money with our community partners to amplify our work. And so I think that that is a great way to move these funds forward. So I'll call to question. Any opposed? Motion carries. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to terminate. Mayor Herford. Oh, before I see Councillor Pettingill's hand, go ahead.
Yeah, just a comment, and for our new colleagues, because I don't recall we've had this discussion, but as a committee as a whole, these decisions are not final until they get ratified at a regular or special meeting. And there's been some motions on the floor and so on. So we all actually do have a bit of time to digest this and potentially adjust. These will become final at a regular or special meeting in a week or two.
That is a great point of process. Thank you, Councillor Pettingill. Councillor Anderson.
Chair, I have in front of me the information report from Mr. Lepage on recreation and culture. Is this an information report? And I'm asking whether I may be able to bring it up for a question to Mr. Lepage.
It was provided as an information report in addition to the motion that we just passed on where we're going to use the remaining COVID-19 grants funding. As Councillor Pettingill just mentioned, that our motions at this table still need to be ratified at a regular meeting. And so if you want to modify that motion at a future date, then you can do so, but we may have missed your opportunity.
Thank you, Chair. I will perhaps take the opportunity next time to ask a question of the author of the report. Thank you.
Yeah, and in that motion that we just passed, we did also ask staff to bring back a memo on how they plan on the final determination of how they will use that those dollars for mental health support. So we'll have another opportunity as well. With that, I will look for a motion to terminate. Mayor Herford, moved by Mayor Herford, seconded by Councillor Hamilton. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, everybody. And we will see many of you at the very exciting open budget house event this evening from 5 to 8 at Brennan Park. For anybody who's listening online, come on down, stay warm and cozy.